Out of despair, I made a deal, but I didn't know it was with the devil. I stood in the study of our family estate, clutching the will in my trembling hands. My parents' handwriting stared back at me, but the words might as well have been written in a foreign language. None of it made sense. This can't be right, I said, my voice shaking. Across the room, Margaret sat in one of Dad's old leather chairs, legs crossed, a smug little smirk on her face. Her lawyer, a sharp-looking guy in a suit that probably cost more than my car, was busy stacking papers into a neat pile. "Oh, it's right, Clara," Margaret said, her tone oozing fake sympathy. "It's all legal. You're just not equipped to handle this kind of responsibility." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "What are you talking about? Mom and Dad trusted both of us. They wanted us to take care of everything together." Margaret sighed dramatically, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Clara, be honest with yourself. You've never been good with money or, well, stability. I mean, how many jobs have you quit in the last few years? They would have wanted someone reliable in charge. That's me." I stared at her, my stomach twisting into knots. "Reliable? You've spent more time maxing out credit cards than running anything serious in your life, Margaret." Her smirk widened. The advisors didn't think so. And there it was, the advisors, the lawyers, the court ruling. Margaret had manipulated them all, spinning some story about me being reckless and unfit to handle the estate or the family business. I had no idea what strings she'd pulled, but the result was clear. She was now the sole heir to everything. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that fake, sweet tone she used when she was about to twist the knife. "It's not personal, Clara. It's just business." I wanted to scream, to throw the stupid will in her face, but what was the point? I didn't have lawyers or connections or money. I had nothing. By the time I left the estate, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the driveway. I packed what little I could fit into my car, a suitcase of clothes, a few keepsakes, and an old photo of our family that I couldn't bear to leave behind. I drove aimlessly for hours, finally ending up at a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room was depressing, with flickering fluorescent lights and a faint smell of mildew. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and tried to wrap my head around what had just happened. Margaret had taken everything: the house, the company, the money, everything Mom and Dad had worked so hard to build. And why? Because she could. Because she wanted to. So I pulled out the photo I'd taken from the estate, a picture of me, Margaret, and our parents, standing in front of the house on a sunny afternoon. Mom's hand rested on my shoulder, and Dad was grinning like he always did. I couldn't stop the tears from falling. They trusted us. They trusted her, and she'd betrayed them. She'd betrayed me. For the next few weeks, I drifted in a fog of bitterness and despair. I tried to look for work, but every rejection letter felt like another punch to the gut. Meanwhile, Margaret was all over the news and social media, flaunting her new life. Lavish parties at the estate, expensive charity galas where she played the perfect heiress. She was living the dream, and I was stuck in a nightmare. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. What did I do to deserve this? It was raining the night it happened. Heavy, relentless rain that blurred the edges of the road and drowned out everything else. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My mind was racing, a chaotic swirl of anger and hopelessness. I thought about confronting Margaret, storming into the estate and demanding answers. But what would that accomplish? She'd just laugh in my face. I blinked back tears, barely noticing the headlights of an oncoming truck, until it was too late. The horn blared, loud and piercing, as the truck swerved to avoid me. I jerked the wheel, and my car spun out of control. The tires screeched against the slick pavement, and then everything happened at once. Metal crunching, glass shattering. The air knocked out of my lungs as the car crashed into a ditch. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I opened my eyes slowly, wincing at the sharp pain radiating through my body. Blood trickled down my temple, warm and sticky, and my head felt like it was splitting in two. Rain dripped through the shattered windshield, and the world outside was a blur of darkness and distorted light. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. But then, through the cracked windshields, I saw something. A faint glow, like a distant light cutting through the rain. It wasn't the headlights of the truck or the flash of emergency lights. It was something else. The light grew brighter, closer, until it filled my vision completely. It wasn't blinding, though. It was warm, almost comforting, like it was pulling me towards something I couldn't quite explain. As the darkness closed in, I heard a voice, calm, steady, and strangely familiar. "Are you ready to make a deal, Clara?" And just like that, everything went black. This is where my old life ended and something entirely new began. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the car anymore. I was standing in a vast, dreamlike space. It was hard to describe, dark but not oppressive, quiet but not silent. It felt like standing on the edge of something infinite. The air shimmered and strange lights danced in the distance, like stars shifting just out of reach. "Clara!" a voice called, smooth and calm. I turned and saw the figure step forward. They were cloaked in shadows, their face impossible to see, but their presence was undeniable. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't comforting either. It just was. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice trembling. "That depends," they said. Their voice was neither male nor female, but it carried weight, like it knew everything I didn't. "You're somewhere between what you were and what you could become." "What does that mean?" "You've reached the end of one path, Clara," they said, "but I can offer you another." I frowned. "Who? What are you?" They didn't answer the question directly. Instead, they stepped closer, and suddenly I could feel their presence like an electric charge in the air. "You've been betrayed, broken, cast aside. But it doesn't have to end here. I can give you the power to rebuild yourself, to reclaim what was stolen, to rise." My chest tightened. "What's the catch?" The figure tilted their head, amused. "There's always a price. When the time comes, I will ask a favor of you, one that cannot be refused." "What kind of favor?" "That," they said, their voice dropping to a whisper, "is not for you to know now." I hesitated, my mind racing. This was insane. It couldn't be real. And yet, deep down, I felt something stirring, a faint, desperate hope. "I don't know," I said slowly. "What if I say no?" "Then you return to what you were," the figure said simply. "Your life remains as it is, empty, broken, forgotten." The words hit me like a slap. I thought about Margaret, about everything she'd taken from me. I thought about my parents, about the promises I'd made to honor their legacy. "I'll do it," I said before I could second-guess myself. "Whatever it takes." The figure extended a hand, dark and shadowy, but solid. "Good choice." I reached out and shook their hand. The moment our hands touched, the space around me exploded with light, and a voice echoed in my mind. "Remember, Clara? Every gift has its cost." When I woke up, I was staring at the white ceiling of a hospital room. At first, I didn't remember what had happened. The crash, the voice, the deal. It all felt like a strange, vivid dream. But then I moved my arm and winced at the ache in my shoulder, and reality came rushing back. I'd survived. Somehow, I was alive. The doctors told me I'd been lucky. No broken bones, just cuts, bruises, and a mild concussion. But as the days passed, I started noticing things. It started small. I'd get these flashes, like déjà vu, only stronger. I'd know exactly where the nurse had left my chart before she came back to the room, or I'd predict what the doctor was about to say before he opened his mouth. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But it didn't stop. After I was discharged, I went to grab coffee at a nearby cafe. As I stood in line, I suddenly knew, without a doubt, that the barista was about to drop the cup she was holding. 3 seconds later, it shattered on the floor. By the time I left the cafe, I was shaking. This wasn't normal. The flashes kept coming, and I started experimenting. I'd walk into a room and let the flashes guide me, showing me where to stand, who to talk to, and what to say. It wasn't long before I realized the flashes weren't random. They were opportunities. And one day I overheard a conversation about a local company on the verge of collapse. I had a flash of their stocks dropping, followed by a rebound after a key announcement. It felt ridiculous, but I used the last of my savings to invest. Within a week, I doubled my money. I used the same strategy again and again, each time growing bolder. I predicted market trends, overheard key information in seemingly chance encounters, and made decisions that paid off every single time. By the end of the month, I had enough money to move out of the motel and into a small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Once I had some breathing room, I started thinking bigger. What if I could use my gift to do more than just make money for myself? What if I could help others? I started reaching out to small businesses, local shops, struggling startups, anyone who needed a second chance. Using my visions, I helped them predict trends, avoid pitfalls, and turn their fortunes around. Word spread quickly. People started calling me a business whisperer, and before long, I had more clients than I could handle. I officially launched a consulting firm focusing on helping small businesses recover and thrive. One of my first big clients was a family owned bakery that was on the verge of bankruptcy. With my guidance, they pivoted to an online model, and within months, they were thriving. The owners were so grateful they cried when they handed me my first paycheck. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building something. But even as my success grew, I couldn't shake the memory of the benefactor's words. Every gift has its cost. It was only a matter of time before I found out what that cost would be. By the time my consulting firm hit its stride, I had more than a little momentum. Small businesses and struggling startups weren't just surviving with my guidance, they were thriving. Every new success became a stepping stone to bigger opportunities, and soon, word about me reached the right people. High-profile clients started calling, entrepreneurs on the verge of bankruptcy, CEOs of mid-sized companies desperate for a turnaround, even a few corporate giants looking for fresh insight. They didn't know about my gift. How could they? But they recognized results when they saw them. My visions, though mysterious and sometimes unpredictable, had become my secret weapon. I'd walk into negotiations knowing exactly what to say and when to say it. I could see the market shifts before they happen, the ripple effects of decisions others couldn't anticipate. At first, I kept my approach modest. But as the contracts grew bigger, so did my confidence. I started to reinvent myself, shedding the timid, broken version of Clara or that Margaret had cast aside. No more secondhand suits or hiding in the shadows. I embraced my new image, polished, sharp, commanding. I learned how to walk into a room and own it, to speak with authority that made people listen. I wasn't just another consultant. I was Clara Liu, and my name was becoming synonymous with success. The best part? It wasn't just about the money. For every contract I signed, I thought about where I'd started, how far I'd come, and the people I was helping. It felt like taking back a piece of myself, one deal at a time. Meanwhile, Margaret's empire, the one she'd stolen from me, was crumbling. At first, it was subtle. Her company had its usual glossy facade, expensive ads, flashy launches, and lavish parties that made headlines. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Margaret was never a natural leader. She was impulsive, always chasing trends instead of building a solid foundation. She poured money into extravagant projects, an overpriced flagship store, a failed celebrity endorsement campaign that bled the company dry. The executives who had been loyal to my parents tried to steer her in the right direction, but Margaret didn't listen. She surrounded herself with sycophants who told her what she wanted to hear, while alienating the people who could have helped her. Then came the scandals. Reports surfaced about poor working conditions in her factories, allegations of harassment and mistreatment of employees. Clients and customers began pulling out, one after the other. Margaret tried to spin the narrative, blaming everyone but herself, but the damage was done. Every week, it seemed, there was another headline about her missteps. Investors lost faith. The company's stock plummeted. The name that had once represented everything my parents had built, their legacy, was becoming a joke. While Margaret's empire crumbled, mine was growing stronger. I started branching out from consulting, buying small companies and assets that aligned with my vision, struggling beauty brands, innovative tech startups, even a few lifestyle companies. My strategy was simple. find opportunities no one else could see and turn them into gold. The acquisitions weren't just about money, they were personal. Every time I bought a company, I thought about Margaret, about how she had stolen my inheritance and squandered our parents' legacy. I wasn't just building a business, I was building something bigger, something better. But as I expanded my reach, I started noticing strange things. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of a shadow in the corner of a room, a whisper I couldn't quite catch. Then the dreams started. They weren't nightmares exactly, but they were unsettling. I'd see the benefactor's shadowy figure standing at the edge of my vision, watching. Sometimes they spoke to me in riddles, their voice echoing in my mind. Every gift has its cost. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the work in front of me. But no matter how much success I achieved, I couldn't shake the feeling that the benefactor was waiting for something. One evening, over drinks with a business associate, I heard the rumors. "Did you hear about Margaret Liu's company?" he asked casually, swirling his glass. "It's a mess. Lawsuits, scandals, clients dropping like flies. Word is, she's drowning in debt." I forced myself to stay calm, though my heart raced at the news. "Really?" I said, feigning mild interest. He nodded. "She's burned a lot of bridges. Investors are pulling out, and I hear the board is thinking about ousting her. Can't say I'm surprised. She's always been more style than substance, you know?" I smiled politely, but inside, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to celebrate. Margaret had taken everything from me, and now she was paying the price for her greed. But another part of me felt sad. This wasn't just about business. This was our family. My parents had worked their entire lives to build something meaningful, and now it was falling apart. And Margaret, the sister I'd grown up with, shared secrets with, and trusted, had done this to herself. I went home that night and sat in the quiet of my living room, staring at the city lights outside my window. I thought about Margaret's betrayal, about the years I'd spent clawing my way back from nothing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Regret? Pity? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. Margaret's fall wasn't over yet. And whether I liked it or not, our paths were about to cross again. It started with whispers. Margaret's name, once synonymous with wealth and privilege, had become a running joke in business circles. At first, the rumors seemed harmless, an embarrassing failed project here, a missed revenue target there. But it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. The embezzlement scandal broke on a Monday morning, and by lunchtime, it was everywhere. News outlets plastered Margaret's face on their front pages with headlines like, "Heiress accused of diverting company funds to fuel lavish lifestyle," and "Margaret Liu's leadership in question amid fraud allegations." Details surfaced quickly. Luxury yachts purchased on company accounts, questionable consultant fees paid to her inner circle, and falsified financial records to cover it all up. The board acted fast. Within days, they voted unanimously to remove Margaret as CEO, citing gross mismanagement and financial misconduct. The fallout was brutal. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Key clients terminated contracts. The stock plummeted to historic lows, and bankruptcy loomed. Margaret, who had once reveled in the spotlight, was now the subject of scorn and ridicule. Her personal life unraveled just as quickly. The lavish parties, the designer wardrobe, the extravagant vacations, all gone. The accounts that had once funded her lifestyle were frozen. The estate, the house we'd grown up in, was seized to cover debts. I heard about it through the grapevine, of course. Business associates, mutual connections, even strangers eager to share the juicy details of Margaret's downfall. Part of me wanted to gloat, to revel in the justice of it all. But another part of me, one I didn't like to admit existed, felt a pang of pity. When I got the call about the family company going up for auction, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't about revenge. At least that's what I told myself. The truth was more complicated. This wasn't just a business opportunity, it was personal. My parents' legacy was on the line, and I couldn't stand the thought of watching it fade into oblivion. My team and I prepared the bid quietly. I didn't want anyone knowing I was behind it, not until it was finalized. The company's value had plummeted so far that it was being sold off for a fraction of its worth. For me, it was a strategic investment, but also a deeply emotional one. The day the deal closed, I sat alone in my office, staring at the paperwork that officially made the company mine. My parents' company, the one Margaret had stolen from me. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt hollow. I thought about my parents, about what they would have said if they could see us now. This wasn't the legacy they dreamed of. This wasn't the future they'd worked so hard to create. But I didn't have time to dwell on the past. The company needed rebuilding, and I was the only one who could do it. The knock at my office door was hesitant, almost timid. My assistant poked her head in, a look of unease on her face. "Clara, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but, well, I think you'll want to hear her out." I frowned, confused. "Who is it?" She said her name is Margaret. The air seemed to leave the room. Margaret. I hadn't seen her in years, not since the fallout, not since everything crumbled around her. "Send her in," I said, my voice steady, though my heart wasn't. When Margaret stepped into my office, I barely recognized her. She looked nothing like the polished, confident sister who had taken everything from me. Her hair was limp and unstyled, her face drawn and pale, and her clothes, once designer and immaculate, were plain, almost shabby. She looked small. "Clara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't say anything, just gestured for her to sit. She hesitated for a moment, then sank into the chair across from me. "I know I don't deserve to be here," she began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. But I didn't know where else to go. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "What do you want, Margaret?" She flinched at the coldness in my tone but didn't look away. "I need your help," she said, her voice cracking. "I've lost everything. The company, the house, all of it. I don't have anywhere to turn." "And that's my problem because," I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Margaret looked down, her shoulders slumping. "Because I'm your sister," she said softly, "and because I know I've made mistakes. I know I hurt you. I was wrong, Clara, about everything. I see that now." I stared at her, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, pity, and something I couldn't quite name. Part of me wanted to throw her out, to remind her of every betrayal, every lie, but another part of me, the part that still remembered the Margaret who used to braid my hair and tell me bedtime stories, hesitated. "What exactly are you asking for?" I said finally. Margaret swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with tears. "A chance," she said. "A job. Anything. I need to start over, and I can't do it alone." I let the silence stretch between us, watching her squirm under the weight of it. My emotions were a storm, crashing and colliding in ways I couldn't control. "You want a chance?" I said finally, my voice calm but icy. "After everything you did to me? After you stole my inheritance, my home, my future?" Margaret flinched as if I'd slapped her, but I didn't stop. "Do you know what it felt like, Margaret?" I continued, leaning forward. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything because of someone you trusted? To be left with nothing while you watch that person live the life that was supposed to be yours?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't say anything. "You didn't just take the company," I said, my voice hardening. "You took our family's legacy. You turned it into a joke, and then you let it burn to the ground." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel satisfaction, just a hollow ache. "You want to know why it all fell apart?" I asked, my voice softening just enough to cut deeper. "It wasn't me. It wasn't revenge. It was you. Your greed, your selfishness, your inability to think about anyone but yourself." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. "You didn't just lose the company, Margaret. You lost me, and that's why it all fell apart." As the silence settled between us, I felt it before I saw it. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing heavy and electric. The shadows in the corners deepened, and a faint, familiar voice echoed in my mind. "Clara," the voice said, calm and steady. My heart stopped. I hadn't heard that voice in years, not since the night of the crash, the night I'd made the deal that changed everything. I blinked, and suddenly, the room seemed to blur. Margaret's form faded into the background, and in her place stood the benefactor, cloaked in shadows as they had been before. "It's time," they said, their voice smooth and unyielding. "Time for what?" I asked, my voice trembling. The benefactor tilted their head, their form shifting like smoke. You made a bargain, Clara, and now I've come to collect. Panic flared in my chest. What do you mean? I've done everything you said. I've rebuilt my life, my company, And yet, the benefactor interrupted, their voice cutting through mine like a knife. Every gift has its cost. You didn't think you could rise without sacrifice, did you? I stared at them, dread pooling in my stomach. What do you want from me? The benefactor gestured toward Margaret, who had reappeared, frozen in place like a statue. You must choose, they said, your sister's life or your success. Save her, and you will lose everything you've built. Let me reap her soul, and you will keep it all. My breath caught. That's not fair! The benefactor's shadowy form didn't waver. Fairness was never part of the deal. I turned to Margaret, who remained frozen, her tear-streaked face etched with desperation. My heart twisted painfully. I thought about everything she'd done to me, everything I'd lost because of her, but I also thought about the moments before the betrayal, before the greed, when she'd been my sister. The benefactor's voice echoed in my mind, cold and final. Choose wisely, Clara. Your time is running out. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest as I stared at Margaret, my mind spinning. Save her and lose everything. Let her die and keep my empire. I knew what Margaret would have done if the roles were reversed, but I wasn't Margaret. The question was, who was I? The room felt smaller, suffocating. Margaret sat across from me, still frozen in time, her tear-streaked face a picture of desperation. The benefactor's shadowy presence loomed behind her, their voice echoing in my head like a drumbeat. Choose. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. My mind was a chaotic storm of anger, pain, and something I didn't want to admit, pity. This was Margaret, the sister who had betrayed me, stolen everything I held dear, and left me to fend for myself. But this was also Margaret, the sister who once held my hand when I was scared of thunderstorms, who whispered jokes to me during family dinners, who promised we'd always have each other no matter what. How is this fair? I asked, my voice cracking. The benefactor tilted their head, their shadowy form rippling like smoke. Fairness is irrelevant. You knew there would be a price. I glared at them. But this is cruel. They didn't respond, and I felt my frustration boil over. I wanted to scream at them, at Margaret, at the whole damn universe. Instead, I paced the room, my thoughts spiraling. For years, my visions had been my compass, guiding me through every challenge, every decision. But now, they were gone. I had nothing but my own gut, and I wasn't sure I could trust it. What happens if I save her? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. The benefactor's tone was calm, almost dispassionate. You will lose everything you have built. The wealth, the power, the influence, it will all disappear. And if I don't, they leaned closer, their shadows stretching toward me, you will retain everything. Your empire will remain intact, and she will face the consequences of her actions. Nothing more, nothing less. I stopped pacing, my heart pounding. It would have been so easy to let her fall, to let her pay for everything she'd done. But as I looked at her, frozen in that moment of vulnerability, something inside me shifted. I thought about the choices Margaret had made, the greed, the betrayal, the lies, and how they destroyed not just her, but our family. And I thought about myself, the empire I'd built, and the person I'd become. Was I any better? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet the benefactor's gaze, or what I assumed was their gaze. I'm done, I said. The room seemed to grow colder. Explain, they said. I'm done with the cycle, I said, my voice stronger now. Greed, revenge, ambition, it's all poison. Margaret made mistakes, terrible ones. But if I let her die, I'll be no better than she was. The benefactor was silent for a long moment, the air around them crackling with tension. You would sacrifice everything for her, after what she did to you? I glanced at Margaret, my chest tightening. I'm not doing this for her, I said. I'm doing this for me. I don't want to live with the weight of this decision for the rest of my life. The benefactor's form shifted, their voice lowering to a whisper. Are you certain? Once this choice is made, it cannot be undone. I nodded, though my stomach churned. I'm certain. They straightened, their shadowy figure looming taller. Very well, they said. You have chosen. The room seemed to blur and ripple, the edges dissolving like watercolors bleeding together. Margaret unfroze, blinking in confusion as she looked around. Clara? She whispered, her voice trembling. But I barely heard her. My body felt heavy, the air thick around me. I could feel the weight of something being pulled away, my visions, my power, the strange force that had guided me for so long. It was like a piece of my soul being torn out, leaving an empty space behind. And then just like that, the benefactor was gone. Margaret stared at me, her brow furrowing. What just happened? I sank into my chair, exhausted in a way I couldn't explain. I just forgave you. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. Clara, I don't know how to thank you. I let out a bitter laugh. Don't thank me, Margaret. You don't owe me anything. Just don't make me regret this. She nodded quickly, wiping at her tears. I won't, I promise. But I barely heard her. My mind was elsewhere, trying to process what I'd just done. For years, my visions had been my anchor, my advantage, my secret weapon. Without them, I felt ordinary, vulnerable. But as I sat there, I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe that wasn't a bad thing. For the first time in years, my life was my own. Margaret left shortly after, promising to make amends and rebuild her life. I didn't know if she'd follow through, and honestly, I wasn't sure I cared. What mattered was that I'd made my choice. The empire I'd built was gone. The wealth, the power, the influence, it had all disappeared overnight like sand slipping through my fingers. But as I stood in my now empty office, looking out at the city skyline, I didn't feel regret. I felt free. The benefactor's words still echoed in my mind. Every gift has its cost. They were right, but sometimes the cost was worth it. I didn't hear from Margaret for weeks after she left my office. Part of me expected her to disappear, to sink back into old habits and let herself spiral further into ruin. But when she finally reached out, it wasn't what I expected. Clara, her email began, short and to the point, I just wanted you to know I've taken a job. It's nothing glamorous, but it's a start. I'm trying. The job was at a nonprofit that helped women re-enter the workforce after financial or personal hardships. It wasn't a position of power or prestige. It was the kind of work Margaret would have scoffed at a year ago. But now, it seemed like she was trying to find a new path, one step at a time. Her progress wasn't perfect, and I knew it wouldn't be. She still had moments of frustration, of slipping back into old patterns. But she was trying, and that was more than I'd ever thought possible. Margaret didn't talk much about the past or the mistakes she'd made. Instead, she focused on moving forward. She called me once, out of the blue, to thank me. I don't think I'll ever understand why you gave me another chance, she said quietly, but I'm grateful. I didn't know how to respond at first. There was still a part of me that struggled to forgive her fully, that carried the scars of her betrayal. But I realized as she spoke that holding on to that resentment wouldn't serve me any more than it would serve her. I didn't do it for you, I told her. I did it for me. Without the visions guiding me, life became quieter, slower. At first, I felt unmoored. The flashes of insight that had once made everything seem so clear were gone, leaving me to rely on my instincts alone. It was humbling, but in a way, it was also freeing. I no longer felt the pressure to outsmart everyone around me or to prove myself over and over again. Instead, I focused on what truly mattered, rebuilding the family legacy, not for revenge, but for honor. I started small, taking what was left of the family business and stripping it down to its core. The flashy, over-the-top projects Margaret had championed were gone. I returned to the principles my parents had always believed in: quality, integrity, and a genuine connection with the people we served. The process wasn't easy. The company's reputation had been badly damaged, and there were moments when I wondered if it was even salvageable. But I kept going step by step, pouring everything I had into the work. Along the way, I found joy in the little things I'd once taken for granted: the satisfaction of an honest day's work, the pride of creating something meaningful, and the relationships I built with my team and clients. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself, not for Margaret, not for the benefactor, not for anyone else. The family business didn't just survive, it thrived. It took time, but as word spread about the company's transformation, old clients began to return, and new ones followed. I focused on creating products and services that reflected my parents' vision, and the response was overwhelming. What I hadn't expected was how much I would learn along the way. Losing everything had taught me resilience, and rebuilding from the ground up had taught me humility. I wasn't the same person I'd been when this journey started, and for that, I was grateful. Margaret even reached out once or twice with suggestions. They were small things, ideas for partnerships, ways to improve operations, but they were thoughtful, and for the first time in years, they felt genuine. I didn't always take her advice, but I appreciated the effort. Nah. Together, we started to piece together what remained of our family's legacy. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be the same as it was before, but it was ours, and that was enough. One sunny afternoon, I found myself standing in the cemetery, a bouquet of fresh flowers in my hands. My parents' graves were side by side, marked with simple headstones engraved with their names and the years of their lives. I knelt between them, placing the flowers carefully at their feet. "I hope I've made you proud," I said softly, my voice catching in my throat. I thought about everything I'd endured: Margaret's betrayal, the crash, the deal with the benefactor, and the years of rebuilding that followed. It had been a long, painful journey, but standing there, I realized how far I'd come. "I've learned a lot," I continued, smiling faintly, "about myself, about forgiveness, about what really matters. It wasn't easy, but I think I'm finally at peace." I sat there for a while, letting the sunlight warm my skin and listening to the rustle of the trees in the breeze. As I rose to leave, I felt a strange sense of calm. The weight I'd carried for so long, the anger, the bitterness, the need to prove myself, was gone. Margaret and I still had a long way to go, but I knew we'd get there, one step at a time. And as for me, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. Not with visions or supernatural powers, but with the strength I'd found within myself. I walked away from the graves, the flowers swaying gently in the wind, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free.